Hi, welcome to Talk About It Tuesdays. Today we're talking about navigating online and other types of classes. My name's Heather. I am an advisor in the Office of Academic Advising.
And my name's Morgan, and I'm an intern in the Office of Academic Advising.
So Morgan, I'm really excited to talk about this topic today because I think it's really important for students, especially given that now we have to offer classes in all these different platforms. And I think they're having a hard time figuring out how to be successful in all of these different ways that they could be taking classes. So this is a really timely topic for us. I can't wait to dive in.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. I think right now our students are feeling a little bit of stress because you don't always get to choose the type of class that you want, just depending on your major and the types of classes you're taking. So hopefully we can provide some tips here for all of our students who may be in a format that they're unfamiliar with.
Absolutely. So let's just dive in.
Right.
All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is asynchronous classes. Morgan, can you remind us the difference between asynchronous online classes and later on we're going to talk about synchronous online classes?
Yep, so an asynchronous online class is one that doesn't have a scheduled meeting time. So we'll get into synchronous here in a little bit that does have a scheduled meeting time. But again, asynchronous, you're not going to have to log in, Tuesday at 10 a.m. It's going to be a little bit more self-paced.
Yep, absolutely. So you have talked with students about online classes before. I know I have. What are some of the challenges that you hear students bring up?
I think the two biggest challenges that I hear with my students are the first one is time management. So, like I said, it is a little bit more self paced. You don't have a professor sitting with you for 50 minutes saying, this is what we're going to learn today. Instead, it's here's the resources, here's the material, spend the 50 minutes when you think is best for you. And then the other thing that I hear quite often is, I just don't know how to use the platform that my professor is using. So I know here at UNI, we typically use Blackboard, but there's a couple other ones floating out there. And even within Blackboard, every professor has the ability to set their course up just a little bit differently. So I think our students have a hard time navigating, where's my syllabus? Where do I actually turn in my assignments? What other challenges have you heard?
I hear those same ones. Because it's asynchronous and there's not that designated meeting time, a lot of students feel like they're trying to teach themselves. And that's probably the biggest challenge, I think, for them is, and I always try to remind them, like, well, you're not really having to teach yourself. I mean, the professor's providing you all of the information necessary for you to learn, but it does take more effort to piece things together. And I always recommend it to my students that, and you're going to talk about this in a little bit, that, for an asynchronous class, you should set up your own schedule for it. You should tell yourself when you're going to be logging in and doing your homework. Just treat it like it was an in-person class. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I definitely agree about the different kinds of technology that maybe the professor might be using, or the different platforms they might be telling you to turn in for, your homework in on. Just because Blackboard is the medium for the university doesn't mean that that's what all professors are using. And that is really difficult. I really feel for our students sometimes when I hear all the different things that they have to be navigating just for one course. Technology has advanced us in a lot of ways, but it doesn't always make everything the most efficient. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But so how do we deal with some of those challenges then?
Well, I think the first one, similar to what we've been talking about, the different platforms, is just to familiarize yourself with your online classes. And then, of course, letting your professor know if you have any questions. Typically, I believe Blackboard will open up just a couple of days before your class is actually scheduled to start. And I always take that opportunity to go in and kind of familiarize myself with the layout of the course. I take note of where my syllabus is located. I read through my syllabus so I can find out the method that my professor wants my assignments turned in. Just making sure that I know the different functions and the pieces that my professor could be using. But sometimes it's just impossible to be on the same page with your professor. And that's a really great time to reach out and ask questions, especially those first couple of days of classes. It's important to locate where your announcements will be posted too. Sometimes they'll come to your email, sometimes they won't. So I really encourage our students to be checking that either daily or 3 to 4 times a week, just to make sure that there aren't any important announcements that you're missing. But the other important thing that I wanted to chat about is that even if you are in an asynchronous online class, your professor still hosts office hours. And whether that be in person or virtual or both, this is a really great opportunity for you to ask your professor, hey, I'm not sure how to turn in my assignment. I wasn't familiar with this function. Just really take advantage of those office hours.
Absolutely. I love this suggestion because what I always tell my students who are going to go to an in-person class is that you should walk campus before classes begin. You should find where all of your classrooms are located, find where the restrooms are, It's the same idea with this suggestion. It's just not, you're not going to go tour in person. You're looking online at how is this class set up? Where am I going to find everything? You're not looking for restrooms. You're looking for where am I turning in assignments? Where am I going to find the syllabus? Where am I going to find my reading at? So I think this is a really good suggestion. And the office hours, totally on point. Students forget because they don't have the access to the professor in the classroom. They think, well, I'm totally on my own. But you're right, they're not on their own. They do have access to the professor. It just has to be in a different way. You're not going to be able just to walk up to them during class and ask them the question. You have to seek them out during designated times, but they're still there. They are still running the course for you, and you should take advantage of their office hours. Absolutely.
For sure. And one other thing that I forgot to mention is that, as opposed to an in-person class where you can walk up and ask your professor directly, you may end up having to email your professor for questions that you have about the material. And with that, professors normally follow the 24 to 48-hour rule. So especially with online classes, if you know you have a test coming up and you can't ask your professor this afternoon a question for the test tomorrow, you really need to be prepared in advance, start studying in advance so that you can ask those questions before you were to need the material.
So this next point is what we had kind of been alluding to already, but schedule a number of hours weekly for the class. So it's nice because you can say to yourself, well, you know what? I don't want to work on a class 3 days a week. Maybe I want to put 3 hours in on 1 day a week and get my stuff done for this class. That's totally at your discretion, but it does take some effort to sit down and think about, when am I going to fit in this online class? Or if you have multiple online classes, where am I going to give all of the time for all of these online classes? The rule of 2 hours for every 1 credit hour that you're taking, you should be studying 2 hours for every 1 credit hour, is still true with online classes. So if you're taking 15 credit hours and they're all online, you still need to be giving 30 hours of study time to it. So just keep that in mind. It's not like being online makes it any less of an importance in the class. Your next one, get out of bed and find a productive learning space. Why don't you talk a little bit about that one?
So I'm going to be honest, when I started taking online classes, I was like, I'm just going to lay in bed. It's more comfortable here. I can still learn the same material. And what I found was that I was like dozing off while reading or dozing off while watching a video that my professor had uploaded. And I really wasn't retaining any of the material because I was focused on taking a nap or being comfortable. So it's really important to get up and find a productive learning space. If you have a desk in your room, that's great. But I think it's even better if you have the ability to get out, possibly find a space on campus or find a space in the community where you don't feel like you're at home and you feel like you are in a learning space. Just getting your body out of that home space is really going to put your mind in kind of a learning environment, and it's definitely going to help you.
Yes. If you wouldn't study in bed for a normal class, it's probably not going to work for you to do your online class in bed, but that you have to find, just like we talked about in a previous episode, you have to find what works for you. So getting rid of distractions might have, you might have to think about, maybe my laptop isn't a great one for doing my online classes. Maybe I need to switch to a computer that doesn't have all of my stuff loaded on it so I can just concentrate on class. Or maybe I can't study around a lot of people and I need to be in a more quiet space. So you have to think about those things even for online classes. Well, especially for online classes, if you're going to have to listen to a lecture or any of those other things. So
exactly. And going along with that, it's important to add variety into your learning strategy too. So unlike a lecture where, you're in the class for 50 minutes and you know that that's what's coming up for the day. There's a lot of different ways that professors will teach the material in an online course. And even within one course, one professor, you could have a bunch of different learning methods. So it's important to switch those up so that you're not falling into the monotony of just 3 recorded lectures back to back. So my suggestion is, watch a couple of recorded lectures, and then right after that, do some reading or do an activity relating to the material, just so that you're not, doing the same thing over and over and kind of losing interest in it. It's really important to switch it up just to kind of retain that information a little bit better.
Yep. And then the last one, talking about using your network. So the hard part about an asynchronous online class is that you may never actually know or see the other students in your class. And that can make it feel like you're doing everything on your own. It's very, I would say, kind of lonely at times, But the truth is there are other students taking the class, and you can definitely reach out, whether it's through Blackboard and you can send messages to your class listserv. And that way you don't have to know specifically who's in your class. It'll send it out for you to everybody who's in the class. But you could use that to ask for getting together for study groups, or just talking over material with other people, and start sending out an invite for things and see who might be interested, because you never know. And just because they weren't interested the first time around, after that first test, more students might think, okay, maybe I do need this help, And then taking advantage of the online discussion boards. Again, if you're familiarizing yourself with the course ahead of time, you can find where those discussion boards are located. You can test out how to use them. The other thing that you could do is just reach out to the professor directly and say, hey, I am really trying to get in contact with our class. Would you mind sending out an email and encouraging, them to respond or something like that? So, utilizing the ways that you do have to get in touch with people. You don't have to do this on your own.
Absolutely.
Anything you want to add to that, Morgan?
Yeah, just with the online discussion boards, if you're watching and you've taken an online asynchronous class before, I am almost positive that you've had a required discussion board within your class. Professor says, post, and then 2 days later, make sure you respond to 2 of your classmates. And I used to never really take advantage of that. I would just be like, great post, Heather, really insightful information. But I learned that I got a lot more out of it when I was actually, engaging with the other student, asking questions and looking consistently to see if they've responded, just because that is another place where you can communicate with classmates.
So that's a great point, because you don't get that class discussion in an asynchronous online course the way that you would in a synchronous or in a face-to-face course. So you have to think about how am I going to engage with other students on material if I can't be with them in a face-to-face or in a even on online together. And so those discussion boards, like you just said, is a really good way to do that. I mean, that is your class discussion. So utilize that. Think about it. In a previous video, when we were talking about learning strategies, we were saying that for some types of learning styles, those discussions are really needed and necessary for them to get the information. So take advantage of that. It may not be a verbal thing that you're doing, but you can definitely still have discussion through the discussion boards, or ask them to discuss it later on. If you are more of a kinesthetic learner or an auditory learner, then invite them to have discussion via Zoom or whatever you want to use after class. That would be a great way to do things. So good. Should we move on to synchronous classes?
Yes, we can. And similar to what we did, a synchronous class is one that does have scheduled meeting times, each week or throughout the semester. So asynchronous, you're kind of learning on your own at your own pace. Synchronous, you are going to have Tuesday at 10 a.m. You have to log in, whether that be Zoom, through Blackboard, through Google Classroom. You will have a specific meeting time each week.
Yep. I mean, very similar things apply to a synchronous and an asynchronous class. You still want to make sure that you've gone in and kind of figured out what platform you're using, where everything is located. You put in here about having a strong internet connection, which you definitely want to make sure that that's true, because if you're going to be live in the class, you don't want your connection to start, blipping out, I guess, as you're trying to listen to a lecture or participate in a discussion. So so that's also, thinking about where you're going to do that class is really important as well.
Exactly. And it's also important, like we said in the last one, to treat an online class like an in-person class and don't forget to engage. So again, find a place to sit up as you would in an in-person class and put away your distractions. I would say most of you are not going to be super comfortable, whipping out your cell phone in an in-person class if you're sitting in the front row. So make sure you're putting your cell phone away when you're doing a synchronous online class. And also make sure to keep your camera on, not just for the benefit of you, but for the benefit of your professor. I don't know if you've ever been in a Zoom meeting where everyone has their camera off, but it's just kind of like talking into an abyss where you can't get verbal feedback. You can't get not verbal, facial cues, facial feedback. So it's just really important to keep your camera on for the benefit of you, for the benefit of your professor. This will also help you make connections, hopefully with students. You may see someone, hey, I saw you on campus that one time. So make sure you keep your camera on. And unmuting your mic for questions or to participate in class. I think it's really, really easy for synchronous classes to just put your mic off, turn your camera off, sit back, distract yourself with something else and say, well, I was in class today, so I was productive, but you didn't really take anything away from it. So by using the mic feature to ask questions or to participate in class discussions, you're really going to get a lot more out of that class. And then the last one, utilize breakout rooms to engage with classmates, create connections, and ask questions. So this is kind of that piece where you would maybe have a breakout room in class where you would huddle up in a group and have a few minutes to chat with each other. You're not going to get that so much in a synchronous class, but that's what these breakout rooms can be used for. You can say, hey, Heather, I know that we're supposed to be talking about this, but I also had a quick question on the material from last week. Would you mind sticking around after class? Or what were your thoughts on the thing that the professor just said? Just to create those connections, ask those questions, and make sure that, you're truly understanding the material.
Yep. The last point here about don't multitasking on your computer. I think we've already talked a little bit about that already, but in an in-person class, you wouldn't be able to multitask very well. And it's not that you can't multitask. Everybody can multitask. It's just that it's taking you away from giving your attention to what the priority is at that time. So if you think that you're going to be able to pay attention to what's going on your phone and also pay attention to what's going on in the lecture, probably you're not going to understand a lot of what happened in the lecture. And then you're going to leave. And just like Morgan had said, you're going to go away thinking like, oh, yeah, I mean, I was in class. If I'm in class, I must have gotten the information. No, if it didn't actually get in the brain, then you really didn't get anything out of it. Taking handwritten notes. I know it's tempting if you're going to be watching on the computer to just take your notes on the computer too. I don't know how many of you have tried that. I find it incredibly difficult to be trying to engage and taking and typing notes, especially on my tiny laptop. My screen only holds so much information at once. So it's really hard for me. I much prefer to do a handwritten note. And we know that statistically, you're going to remember more and learn more if you are handwriting them rather than typing them out. So, and then asking the professor to provide copies of slides prior to the class, or if they can't do that, maybe after the class, so that you can maybe review and look at other things that I should have been paying attention to that I missed. So.
Absolutely. All great stuff.
All right. So hybrid classes. What challenges do you hear about hybrid classes?
Students find that hybrid classes are difficult because it's different every single day. One day you might be in person and then the next day you're online, and it's kind of hard to flip back and forth from the in-person mentality to the online mentality. I mean, we've already talked about some of the differences that you have from in-person to online. And so being able to kind of switch your thinking and switch your learning style on such a short notice is something that my students find pretty difficult.
I would agree. Especially when the class is just starting out. I have students who will say, I was confused which day I was supposed to be meeting. So maybe I missed my first class. And then when I tried to get clarification, I think the professor was kind of confused. And so it's hard sometimes to get everyone on the same page, especially if your class is split, or half of the class is meeting on one day and the other half is meeting on another day. And then you've got an online day and they're thrown in. So I guess my best advice for that is just be patient and diligent, and don't give up just because you get one answer and think like, well, they obviously don't care or they don't know. Continue to ask, continue to show up. If you're not coming on the right day, figure out what day everyone else is going and show up on that day. But you gotta continue to move forward with it. Don't get stuck in, well, nobody's giving me the answer, so I'm just not going to care anymore about it. That's what's going to land you in an F for sure. So
Absolutely. Yep. And another thing that's really important is just being consistent in your preparation for both modes of instruction. So I'm the kind of person that reads my textbooks ahead of class, as you're supposed to. But I think we can often find ourselves in the mentality of like, well, I'll read my textbook for my in-person class because my professor might call on me and I'll need to know the material. But I'm not going to read ahead of my online class because it's not as important. I could just, read after and nobody's going to call me out on that. But reading ahead is really important because it gives you a basis for the information that you're going to be learning. And so if you don't have that foundational knowledge going into your online classes, you're not going to be as successful and you're not going to be able to connect the information as well.
Yep, that is true. Some of these other things we've kind of talked about before, but using a planner to track when you're in person and virtual, that can help if you use it. Thinking about utilizing that in-class time wisely. So if you do have questions from your online time, make sure you're writing those down so that once you get into class, you can really ask those questions, whether it's to the professor or to your classmates. It's always frustrating when you get in somewhere and you're like, oh, I had questions, but now I don't remember them. That happens. So write them down. If they're important, write them down. And again, remembering to use your professor's office hours. Likely there's going to be a lot of students who are going to have questions and want time with the professor during class. So find the other, appropriate time to meet with your professor outside of class time to get those questions answered, because they are important. Your time is important. Your professor's time is important. So utilize what you have at your disposal appropriately so that you get the best outcome from it. So
Exactly. We've talked about this one with the other two types of online classes, but it's super important with this one too. Treat your online time just as important as your in-person time. Hybrid classes, your online time might be synchronous, it might be asynchronous, but at the end of the day, it's just as important as your in-person time because your professor is trusting you and holding you accountable to learn the information that they've provided for you. And so you need to take a little bit of extra time and make sure you're treating this just as important as your in-person class, if not just a little bit more important, so that you can take accountability and learn that information.
Yeah. Final point here is about bringing necessary materials home with you from your in-person class. So, if you are taking a lab that's going to meet online at some point, make sure you have all the stuff that you need. Physical handouts. If you get physical handouts in class, make sure you're taking those home with you. Don't forget them somewhere. Any of the notes that you're taking, you should definitely be taking notes. So make sure you're bringing those home so that you can review them later on as well.
I think one of the unique things that a lot of our students are facing right now is, you may have to up and leave campus for a certain period of time, whether that be to home or to somewhere else. And so if you do end up having to leave your consistent space, make sure that you're taking everything that you need with you if you are transitioning to either a hybrid or an online class. So grabbing your textbooks, grabbing your notes, keeping all of those things in one place. So if you do have to leave quickly, you'll know exactly where those are and you won't be forgetting anything when you do eventually have to continue your learning virtually.
I think keeping them in a consistent space is good because if an emergency happens and you're not able to grab things the way that you had planned on being able to grab them if you needed to leave, you want to be able to tell whoever is going to go in and try to help you out to grab whatever it is that you need. You want to be able to know, like, hey, I know exactly where these things are. They're not going to want to go messing around looking for stuff under piles of other things. So keeping things, as orderly as you possibly can might be helpful, especially right now when we don't know, when people have to leave or when they have to go into quarantine, anything like that. So, all right. So our next one is in-person classes. So take it away, Morgan. What can we possibly tell them about in-person classes they don't already know?
Well, that's the thing. I feel like this is the type of class that our students are most familiar with. It's what they grew up in, elementary all the way into high school. If you're a newer student, you may have not as many in-person classes as you thought you were going to have, but you're still pretty familiar with that. So you're probably sitting there like, I know everything I need to know. But surprisingly, as I was doing some research for this, there were things that I had even learned that, after almost 6 years of college, I still could have used from day one. So the very first thing to think about is arriving early and make sure you're in a space that's comfortable for your learning. Just like getting up and getting out of bed and sitting at a desk or sitting somewhere that's conducive for learning, you need to do this for your in-person classes too. So arriving early, it allows you to ask your professor any questions or to connect with classmates. How many times have you run into class 30 seconds before it's supposed to start and think like, oh, I had a question about the learning or the reading, but I didn't have time to ask it? Getting there 5-10 minutes early will give you a little bit of time to also connect with classmates. Hey, Heather, I did that reading yesterday and I just was really confused about this one thing. What were your thoughts on it? Or, hey, Heather, what are you doing after class? We could totally connect and talk about that discussion from last week. Also, giving yourself time to arrange your necessary materials on your desk, especially if you are a visual learner where you like to highlight things, you like to use different pens, different pencils. Being able to just grab one quickly off of your desk instead of having to search through your bag every time you need something new is going to make you more efficient in class, and it's also going to be less of a distraction for everyone around you. And then this one is huge for me, bringing water and making sure that your computer/device is charged. I don't go anywhere without my water bottle. It's kind of a safety net. It's something that I know would be very distracting if I had to get up and leave for that. And then you never know where you're going to sit in class. Even if you have an assigned seat, you may not be anywhere near a plug-in or an outlet. So please, 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 if you're going to use a computer, if you're going to use a device, make sure it's charged before you go to class.
Yes. We've talked about this already, but eliminating distractions. So turning off your phone, logging out of social media. I cannot stress enough that you really have to make your class your priority. There's no emergency that's going to happen while you're in class that you can't be notified of or deal with after class. If something was truly terrible happening, someone would find a way to get a hold of you, even if your phone is off. Somebody would literally come to the classroom and call you out for whatever the emergency is. So, and most of the time those things aren't happening. If there is something that you have to, I've had students tell me when I'm teaching, hey, I am expecting that this thing is going to happen and I need to leave my phone on because it's like that important that I am notified and I might need to leave if it should happen. Then I am at least aware of it and I'll say that's fine. And then I talk to them about trying to do it as undisruptively as possible to the class. But if you're leaving your phone on just because you want to read the latest gossip from whatever, or whatever you want to catch up on an episode of something like that, to me is just rude to your classmates and to your professor. If you don't really want to take the time to sit in class and actually get the information, kind of wondering why you're paying for it and what you're doing there. So, just you have to think about it in those terms. You're paying for the class. Why are you allowing other things to take you away from what's going on in the class?
Exactly. And distancing yourself from your friends. I know that this one I wrote on here and I was like, I would never want to do this, but I was also very chatty during my classes. Like I would hear something and it would spark a story in me and I would want to tell my best friend sitting next to me. And that wasn't always the most conducive for my learning. So if you can, maybe sit a couple seats away from your friends. I promise they'll still sit with you at lunch. They'll still want to hang out with you after, but class is not the time to socialize. Class is the time to learn.
Yep. Coming to class with a plan and listen when the professor gives you a rundown of the class or the schedule for the day. We've talked before about trying to preview things before you do your reading at night or before you get to class. Your mind needs context. If you're going into it completely unaware of what your topic is for the day, what the reading was before, you're not going to participate as well in class. You're not going to value the information as much. You're not going to remember as much because you have no context for what you're going to be learning that day. That's up to you. That's not up to your professor to give you that. You have to do that for yourself. So go to class prepared. again, you're paying for it. Why are you showing up to class not prepared? If you have a problem with how to get prepared, there's plenty of resources to help you learn about different effective ways to be prepared for class with reading, with studying, all of that. So.
And I think a lot of professors are typically consistent with the way that they run classes, whether that's the first 5 minutes are always for questions or the first 5 minutes for current issues, and then they'll lecture for 10, and then you'll have a 5-minute breakout. Professors kind of like to have a plan when they go into class. So try to listen and pick up on patterns so that you are prepared. If you have questions at the beginning of class, your professor is going to allow time for that. So again, pick up on those patterns, listen for the rundowns, but also come to class as prepared as you can.
Yeah. Utilize your learning style and get the most out of class. Okay, I've harbored on it already, so I'm not going to harbor on it anymore. You see what we're saying here, taking notes, moving around for discussion, just participation. It's on there 3 times in big letters, like this is important. Especially if you're verbal, especially if you're kinesthetic, that participation, even if you're auditory, listening to the discussion, hearing what other people have to say, participation is really one of the most effective ways for you to learn, to engage, to remember. So do it. Take time after class to repack everything in its place and be sure that you're keeping your notes organized. Again, that's especially now when you don't know if you're going to have to leave suddenly or have to quarantine and not get to the things that you had planned to be able to get to. Having them in some order is going to make things easier if you need somebody to pick things up for you later on.
I was so bad at this. In my undergrad, I would have physical notes, but I would also have my laptop open. And I would literally just shove my physical note papers in my laptop, close the lid, and throw it in my backpack. And then I'd go to my next class and I'd have all these papers sitting there from the class previous. I'd stick them under my laptop and I'd do the same process. And I'd get back to my room at the end of my day and I would have notes from 4 different classes just sitting there. And it was the most unorganized way of learning possible. So please, please, please have a separate folder, have a separate place that you keep your notes for each class, have them organized. And then again, put them somewhere safe, put them somewhere organized so you can grab them quickly or someone else if worst comes to worst.
Yeah. Cause if you're like me and if I do that, sometimes I am in a rush and I just cram things in and then it piles up. And then when I get home, the last thing I want to do is try to figure it all out. And then it just builds. And then I never get it figured out. You always think, oh, I'll do it later. And then later turns into never. And now you have an F. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Exactly.
Take the time. There's never a better time to do things to do things a way that works for you than the present time. Procrastination is not your friend.
Yes. No matter what kind of class you're in, don't procrastinate.
No matter what kind of class you're in, procrastination is not your friend. So, all right. General tips, Morgan.
Yeah, the first one.
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
Don't be afraid to try new modes of instruction. You never know which one you'll prefer the most. I was terrified of online classes. I was like, I'm not going to be successful. I don't know how to do this. I was scared to take accountability for my learning, and it turned out to be one of my favorites. So, when you're registering for classes, don't be afraid to add in some variety. If you have a choice, you may not even have the choice and you'll be forced to, but don't be afraid, embrace it. You'll be able to learn just as well as the other ones.
Yep. Keep an open line of communication with your professors. This is really important. A lot of times students come in and they complain to me, I didn't do well in the class because of the professor, because they didn't do, or they did do, and it didn't work for me or whatever. And I always want to say, when you're ready to blame the professor, I want you to ask yourself 2 questions. 1, did I try to address it with the professor, not just through an email, but in a face-to-face way so that I could have a conversation with them? And 2, what did you try to do outside of addressing it with a professor to adapt to the situation? And if you have not really given thought to those things, if you really didn't try to address it and you just figured, well, it's the professor's fault, so there's nothing I can do, you didn't really advocate for yourself and you didn't really help yourself out. And blaming the professor isn't going to change the grade. you have to start taking responsibility for some of these things and realizing that you can grow, you can adapt, you can change. It may not be the best situation, it may not be your most preferred way of learning the information, but there's always things that you can do that can make it better, that can enhance what you're doing so that you can at least be successful in the class. You may not get an A plus, but you can get, you can pull a B, you can pull a C. That's fine. Sometimes that's all you can expect from a class. But if you're going to come in and just blame everything on the professor, that's not really fair. And it's probably, not always the truest either. So.
For sure. And one of the things that I hear the most from my students is that, my professor's just uploading the material. They're not, listening to my learning style. They're not adapting to my learning style. But you need to put it in perspective. Not every in-class professor is going to be able to adapt to your specific learning style too. They have a class of 50, 100, 200 students. And so it's important, if you're not understanding the material, if you're not meshing well with the mode of instruction, just to communicate with their professor. It may not be their preferred method either. Like, they may not love teaching an online class either, but if you work together, if you work in tandem, I promise that there will be flexibility. Your professor will understand where you're coming from better, and they're going to better be able to support you.
I would also say that keeping, one thing that's really good is just keeping a log of things that you have done. Because if you get to the end of your semester and you truly feel like you did everything you could to be successful in that course and you still ended up with a poor grade, if you decide you want to pursue something like a student request or a grievance thing against the professor, you're going to need a documentation of all the things that you tried when you tried them, because they're not just going to take your word for it. Like, you can't just say like, oh yeah, I totally was, in class and I attempted to meet with the professor 8 times. You need to have proof of that. That's how your grievance or your student request gets taken seriously. So.
And then the final one, you have the power to be successful in any type of class. It doesn't matter if it's online, in person, a mixture of both. It doesn't matter if you've done it before or not. You have the power to be successful because you have the accountability over your learning. But it's all about taking the steps that you need to take, having a plan, and the follow through so that you can actually learn the material in whatever type of class you're taking. I promise you, if you put in the work, you will be successful. Again, you might not get that A that every single person wants, but you will be successful and you will learn the material as long as you're putting in the work.
Yep. All right. So in closing, have a plan, believe that you can do it. Don't put blame on other people. Take responsibility. Use your resources and ask for help. And if you do those things, Morgan and I are confident that you will earn passing grades, that you will learn the material, and that you will graduate with, not only with a GPA that you're happy with, but also just with a sense of you actually got something with your degree and you want to do something with it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're needing extra resources, you know that we're here. There's our contact information. You're also welcome to reach out to our peer advisors in the office. They're a great resource as well. But we believe in you. We're excited to see you take some of these tips and utilize them in this upcoming semester and beyond. If you're enjoying these Talk About It Tuesdays, you're always welcome to join us for our next one. It's going to be finding your network, finding academic help 6 feet apart. And we all know that these are challenging times, but that doesn't mean that you don't still have a support network that can help you get through whatever it is you're facing, especially classes in college. So feel free to look out for our next video. Heather, anything before we head out?
Oh, I'm pumped. I can't wait to hear stories about students who've tried these methods. So.
Exactly. Well, reach out if you guys have anything, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.